I think we're pretty intelligent, and we look around and we look at what the Biden administration is doing, and it's like they're blinded. Have they not read the charter? Do they not know, in trying to force Netanyahu or put pressure on Netanyahu to do these things and to negotiate with these people? I mean, all the billions of dollars that have gone in to the Gaza Strip, and as we know, a lot of the Hamas leaders are wealthy. They're living in Qatar and in these high rises, but yet the Biden administration forgets all this stuff. It's like they're blind. I mean, they could have used all that money to build condos and have vacations and everything else. So to me, I look at the Biden administration and I wonder if they're blinded or if they're just simply foolish.
The Biden administration only needs to look back in 2000 at the Camp David summit with Clinton, 2005 through 2007 with Bush, 2014 with John Kerry, Secretary of State with the Obama administration. Every time, even Trump tried it a little bit with it too, but of course he didn't try it at the level that these other guys did. It always failed. There's no way that that's going to work, and it's not biblically endorsed. And we're going to talk in the latter segment about how militarily the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict is going to be resolved, not politically brokered. As we move forward and we talk about last year, one of the big deals last year was Hezbollah. Hezbollah started to engage shortly after the October 7th massacre with Israel. Now, they've got about 150,000 missiles, and they've literally launched several thousand since October 7th, around that time. October 10th, I think they started at Israel. But they've been predominantly, they're less advanced missiles. A lot of them have fallen indiscriminately in fields that have been taken out by the Iron Dome. They have caused some problems for Israel. They've killed some people, etc. But I'm going to read the reasons why they haven't gone full throttle yet, because I think it's a layered campaign that Iran's got going in phase 2 would involve Hezbollah throwing their firepower. Because last year, Israel prepared, May of 2022, Israel did a Chariots of Fire military drill, a big exercise preparing for a multi-front war with Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, Houthis, Shiite militias in Iraq, and they prepared for massive thousands of missiles. They said 6,000 missiles a day the first couple of days, 2,000 effective missiles in the phase 2, all kinds of casualties inside of Israel. They were preparing for that even back in May of 2022. That has not happened yet on the level that it could, that Israel was preparing for. And what has happened is Israel's got evacuees from the northern part of Israel. Roughly about 80,000 people are living in hotels now for the last 4 months. And I've got these bullet points of why I think Iran is basically allowing Hezbollah to just sort of play on a simple level, like a crosstown conflict rather than a massive engagement. Remember in 2006, the summer of 2006, a 34-day conflict, Hezbollah launched 4,000 missiles into northern Israel and kept most of the residents of northern Israel in bomb shelters for 34 days. They haven't even started on that level yet in Israel, although the evacuations, of course, have happened. And Israel, by the way, is saying they're going to have to take out Hezbollah and move them back further so that Israel can start bringing the evacuees back into their hometown.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly right, because the Litani River is very important. And they don't want what happened in the south, where they were able to break through the wall. They went in and they attacked all the very clear and adjacent cities. Well, in the north, the Litani River, from the border of Israel, it can be as short as 2 miles. And so there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people that have evacuated up there. And because if they were able to cross and get over the border, they'll have another slaughter in all these cities. So they've evacuated most of those cities. And again, they don't want to repeat of what has happened in the south.
So what I write in the article about why Hezbollah may not be involved on the level as of yet, commanded by Iran to go full throttle, I write these things. 1, the goal could be to spread the IDF thin by diverting troops and important military resources from Israel's north down into the Gaza. We're seeing that happen, although Israel is deployed strongly in the north, but they are being depleted down there. Deplete some of Israel's missile defense systems, namely the Iron Dome. And of course, if America starts cutting back on some of the aid, that's going to make it even harder.
Exactly. I think that's something that we need to mention, because what the Biden administration, again, has been doing is, again, threatening to reduce the resupply of the Iron Dome, the David Sling. They have all these other mechanisms of defense. And so if they don't get resupplied, well, they're not going to be ready for when the real Hezbollah attack comes, which again, they'll launch tens of thousands of missiles. And when that real barrage happens, I mean, will Israel be able to keep up with the limited supplies that they have?
Right. So that's another reason. I think the other thing, too, what it is doing is creating danger and chaos and hysteria among the civilians living in northern Israel, forcing these Israelis to evacuate their homes and towns. What that does is it renders them unavailable as combatants should Hezbollah initiate a ground war with hand-to-hand and house-to-house fighting. It makes them a refugee burden on the Israeli government and society. And all tourism has currently ceased in northern Israel, devastating the economy. So it's got economic impacts as well. Also, it provides more time for the international community and the Muslim nations within it to further unite in a propaganda media war against Israel. And that's playing totally to Iran's favor at this point in time. We're seeing not only the Arab countries, but the international community as well is meddling on Israel and how they should fight in this war. And then lastly, I wrote, it also gives Iran more time to arm their hypersonic ballistic missiles with nuclear weapons that are probably already in their arsenal.
Totally agreed, Bill. And let's not move on too quick here, because one of the things that we see, again, since October 7th, is this propaganda war. And Israel's defending itself. They're going in. They're going to clean out Gaza. But what did we see? I mean, I always thought and knew that anti-Semitism was still around. But after October 7th, to see all these pro-Hamas protests in London and in Paris and all these other places, even around the United States, I was shocked that this anti-Semitism was there, and this gave it an opportunity to bubble up. And so when we think about that, as we move forward, every time Israel, every day that this goes on, Israel is losing the propaganda war because they're going in there, they're cleaning house, and the world is against them. And so as we continue to watch this, Israel's continuing to be isolated. They're just going to continue to be isolated every day that this goes on. And we're hearing this could go on for several more months or even another year. And so in that, the isolation of Israel is continuing. The propaganda is going to continue. I mean, that really is one of the key things I see right now.
Right. And even, unfortunately, the Biden administration is contributing greatly to that propaganda war. I mean, I won't mention the words, but because of the frustration President Biden's had with Netanyahu, he's called him a blankety blank. He just can't get Benjamin Netanyahu to comply with his two-state aspiration. And what is this two-state supposed to bring? They think it'll normalize relationships with Saudi Arabia and the Arab world. Well, that would take you back to the Arab Peace Initiative, which is the prerequisite for any relationships with Saudi Arabia. And that involves several things. One is give back land for peace, land that Israel acquired in 1967. And also, as if Saudi Arabia, they said, well, what you'll get in return, Israel, give us land and peace for a Palestinian state. What you'll get in return is the Arab countries will start to normalize relationships with you, as if Saudi Arabia can control all the Muslim hatred throughout all those nations. They've got no guarantee that they can offer that.
Exactly. I don't think there's any way that Saudi Arabia is going to convince Hamas to change their charters and to change this hatred. I mean, their very existence, their very identity is geared towards removing Israel from the river to the sea. They can't ever change that. If they ever do, their entire identity will be misplaced. And I mean, Israel learned a lot from 2005, leaving there. Now, what do you have? You have 400 kilometers worth of tunnels all through the Gaza Strip, and some of them are going into Egypt. And I mean, that really is an amazing thing to see, that some of them are going into Egypt, and which means a lot of material and contraband are coming from the Egyptian area. And so will they be able to convince, well, Saudi Arabia or even these other, if we had this new accords, would they be able to convince the Palestinians? I don't think so.
Yeah, and you mentioned Egypt. I want to spin there in a moment. But like you're saying, you cannot convince all the Muslims who hate Israel to be their friends overnight. The 45-year anniversary of the Iranian Revolution in 1979 was recently celebrated in a parade with chants to death to America and death to Israel. I mean, you don't change that disposition in that region over there. It's an ancient hatred that goes back from time immemorial that is now embraced in a religion of violence called Islam. Egypt and Jordan. Right after October 7th, shortly thereafter, both of those countries who have fragile peace treaties with Israel sided with Hamas. Basically, it's the occupation of Israel, they call it, that is the real culprit and the real problem. And now that we see that Israel is moving its way down, and by the way, both countries, let me start with this one. Now that Israel is moving down into the Rafah crossing, the Rafah take the battle down there, where a lot of those Palestinians have had to leave parts of northern Gaza to move down there. There's over 1 million people now in that area huddled down there. The Biden administration, everybody's going, don't go in there, have a ceasefire, etc. Egypt, meanwhile, has said they built high walls. They got 40 tanks there. They're going to have. They're saying, okay, don't let these refugees come into our country. We're going to put them in an internment type camp. We're not going to call it a refugee camp because that's more permanent. But the moment they start coming in and infiltrating our country, the peace treaty that we have with Israel could be suspended. And Jordan is saying the same thing. We do not want them in our country as well. So these Palestinians are being forced into exile. Mm-hmm. They got nowhere to go. And so now the burden becomes Israel's burden, and Israel can't, they're fighting some kind of a sanitary war that the world's trying to dictate. Israel can't do that.
For the most part, Israel does not want to annex these places. I mean, this is well known. I mean, again, when I was studying modern Israel, I always ask, my professor, well, why doesn't Israel just take over? And he says they don't want to because they are built on a democracy, which means that if these other areas A, B, and C, for example, the West Bank, there's a lot of Muslims that live there. And if they go in there and annex, they have to give them citizenship, which means then they get a right to vote. And then they're going to vote, and it's going to change the nature of the Knesset, the parliament in Israel. And eventually, just by sheer numbers of birth, it will become a majority vote. The majority of the voters will become Islamic. And so they could just simply vote out a new constitution or whatever else. So Israel does not want to annex these places. And I mean, that really is one of the main challenges as we watch this is, will they maintain sovereignty? They have to maintain sovereignty. And we see that, again, even in the West Bank area, even though the Palestinian Authority has main authority there, Israel still reserves the right to go in there with the army and to, again, to bring control or to police these areas if necessary.
Yeah, and so back to the relationship with America and Israel. Of course, many people are very supportive of Israel within this country, but back to the Biden administration in general. One of the hits on initially when Benjamin Netanyahu became the prime minister at the end of 2022 was that he didn't get invited to the White House. I think it was around September he came over to America, still didn't meet in the White House to my knowledge. I think he met at the United Nations at the 78th meeting or 78th, whatever they call it. So it was a slap there. And then, of course, after that, we have October. And now we got so initially, America understood that they were wrong. The massacre was absolutely terrible. So we supported it. But all of a sudden, now that whole tide is shifting toward trying to control the situation. And of course, in an election year, a big carrot on the Biden stick would be if I could put together a two-state solution. Yeah. And he's going full throttle in that direction. So I see very grave concerns for this country if we're going to continue pressuring Israel in that direction.